I knew something was off the second I saw the fresh tire tracks in the dirt near my north pasture. I don't get many visitors out here on my ranch just outside of town unless you count the occasional lost tourist or a nosy coyote. But this felt deliberate. I'm Dax Greer. Retired firefighter, widowed father, and the only man in this county stubborn enough to own 20 acres smack in the middle of an HOA development. The HOA, Golden Trails Estates, built up around my family's land over the past 10 years, constantly trying to encourage me to sell. I never budged. And that has made me their favorite problem. So when I rode my ATV out to the back end of my property and saw a brand new 6-foot aluminum fence stretching across the ridge, I stopped cold. It ran for at least 200 feet, completely enclosing the upper pasture. My pasture. And in the middle of it all stood Dolores Kensington, HOA president, with her overly bleached bob haircut and a clipboard clutched like it was a holy relic. "You're trespassing, Dolores," I called out. She turned, lips pursed so tight they vanished. "Actually, Dax, you're trespassing. This is now part of Golden Trails Community Open Space, approved unanimously by our board." I stared at her like she'd grown a third eye. "This is my land, it's on my deed. I've got survey lines going back to 1968, she huffed. "We conducted our own survey. It showed this pasture is within the HOA's expansion zone. We've seized it in accordance with Clause 23 of our Community Development Plan. It's for the good of the neighborhood." I blinked. "You seized it." She smiled like she'd just won a baking contest. "Consider it a reallocation. We've already allocated funds to build a dog park here. You'll receive a modest compensation package, eventually." I was stunned. She really thought she could just take my land, fence it off, claim it for a dog park, and the kicker, the gate had a shiny new padlock on it. "Impressive fence," I said, walking over to the gate. "Thank you, we spared no expense," she chirped. I pulled out a small brass key from my pocket and slid it into the lock. It clicked open in half a second. Dolores's smile faltered. "See, you put up your fancy fence, but you didn't change the gate hardware. That's the same latch I installed 3 years ago when I fenced my cattle in, and I'm the only one who's got the key." Her eyes narrowed. "That gate is HOA property now." "No, Dolores," I said, stepping inside and locking it behind me. "This whole pasture is mine. And you just built your HOA-funded fence on my private land without consent." Her face flushed red. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Oh, I do," I said, already pulling out my phone to call my land surveyor and a friend at the county assessor's office. "And I've got a pretty good idea of what comes next." She stormed off, muttering something about calling a lawyer. I didn't bother watching her go. I was already thinking ahead because if she crossed the line this far, I knew she wasn't done. But neither was I. The next morning, I drove into town before most of Golden Trails finished brewing their coffee. I had 2 stops to make. First, the county surveyor's office, and then the courthouse. I brought the original deed my grandfather signed in ink so old the paper had browned around the edges. It was the kind of thing most folks frame. I brought it in a fireproof case. In the survey office, I met with Brenda. She'd been working the desk since I was a kid, tagging along behind my father during cattle auctions. She wore her glasses like a badge of honor and had a brain like a steel trap. "Brenda, I need certified boundary maps for parcel 49-C. Historical, current, and anything recorded in the past 5 years." She pulled her glasses down her nose. "Someone pockin' at your fence lines again." "They put up a new one," I said, her eyebrows lifted. "On your side of the ridge, right across it." She didn't say another word. Just turned and started typing. 30 minutes later, I had 3 stamped and signed parcel maps showing the exact longitude and latitude of my land clear as the sunrise. No overlaps, no easements, no ambiguity. My property line ran straight across where they'd driven those aluminum posts. I left with the documents tucked under my arm and headed to the courthouse. By noon, I'd filed an injunction request with the county clerk to halt all construction on that section of land. The clerk told me it'd be forwarded to Judge Harlan's desk that afternoon. Harlan used to fish with my dad. Fair man didn't care for developers. By the time I got back to the ranch, a crew had already arrived. 2 men in neon vests were unloading bags of mulch and concrete blocks. One of them was reading from a blueprint. "You boys lost?" I asked as I stepped out of my truck. "Dog park installation," the taller one said. "We're just following the work order. Let me see it." He hesitated but handed it over. The paperwork had Golden Trails HOA letterhead at the top, along with a signature from someone named Craig Lutterman. I didn't recognize the name. "Tell your supervisor the job's canceled. This land's under legal dispute as of 1 hour ago. You keep working here, your company's gonna be liable for every shovel of dirt you move." The shorter guy looked at his partner, then back at me. "We ain't trying to get sued, man." "Let's call it in." They packed up without argument. Back inside, I reviewed the work order again. It listed the parcel as community green space acquired via board authority. No mention of a sale, no transfer of title. They hadn't even tried to buy it, they just declared it theirs on paper. That night, I dug deeper. I pulled up the HOA's meeting minutes from the past 6 months. They were required to publish them online, though most people never bothered reading them. Buried in the April file was a vote labeled Parcel Expansion Authorization Phase 3. It passed 5-0. No public hearing, no landowner notification. They voted in a closed session to expand their territory by simply reclassifying land that didn't belong to them. Then I saw something worse. Attached to the minutes was a scanned memo from their legal counsel. It warned that acquiring land through boundary redefinition without owner consent would not hold up in court. The memo was dated 3 weeks before the vote. They knew it was illegal and did it anyway. I printed every document, highlighted every line, and stapled it into a single packet. Then I sent copies to the county attorney, the sheriff's office, and Judge Harlan's clerk. I didn't need to yell. Paperwork yells louder than any man ever could. 2 days later, I was stacking hay bales when a sheriff's cruiser pulled down my drive. Deputy Ellis stepped out, young guy but sharp. He nodded at me as he walked up. "You Dax Greer, last I checked. Got a report about a property boundary dispute. Thought I'd take a look." I handed him the folder. He flipped through it, whistled low. "They built a fence across your deeded land." "Sure did. And tried to zone it without a title transfer." "Exactly." He closed it. "Judge Harlan issued a temporary injunction this morning. That fence is to be removed within 72 hours or they face civil penalties." "Appreciate that." Ellis looked toward the ridge. "Mind if I get some pictures? Help yourself." While he walked the property line, I rode out to the far side of the pasture and checked the old cattle gate. Someone had welded a new lock on the other side's sloppy job, probably done in a hurry. I took a pair of bolt cutters from the Adivi's cargo box and snapped it clean. The next meeting of the HOA board was scheduled for Thursday evening. I decided to attend. I hadn't been to one of their meetings in years. They usually held them in the community center, a building so polished it looked like it belonged in a resort brochure. I showed up in my usual canvas work coat and boots, drawing a few sideways glances from the crowd of retirees and realtors. Dolores was already at the front table, flanked by 4 board members. She spotted me and stiffened slightly. She didn't speak until the meeting was officially called to order. "Before we begin tonight's agenda," she said, "we have a guest. Mr. Greer, you have the floor." Briefly, I walked up, laid the printed packet on the table, and spoke into the microphone. "These pages show that your board knowingly authorized illegal construction on privately owned land, disregarded legal counsel, and proceeded to fund it with HOA dues. I've filed a formal complaint with the county, and I've requested a criminal investigation into the misuse of funds and property seizure without due process." Gasps went up around the room. Dolores didn't even try to respond. One of the board members leaned over, whispering something that made her eyes narrow. I continued. "Your contractor has been ordered off my land. Your fence is coming down. And if I find so much as a shovel out of place, I'll haul the whole lot of you into court myself." "I've got the time." The room was silent. Then, from the back, a voice piped up. "Is this why our dues went up last month?" Another followed. "You used our money to build a dog park on stolen land." Dolores tried to regain control. This is not the appropriate forum for, but she was drowned out. I turned and walked out without another word. I didn't need to stay. The fire had been lit. By the next morning, 3 of the board members had resigned. An emergency homeowners meeting was scheduled for the coming weekend. Word spread fast, especially when Ellis returned with an official notice to remove the fence within 72 hours or face escalating fines and potential criminal charges for trespassing and misuse of funds. Dolores hadn't stepped onto my property since, but I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Because I'd just uncovered something far worse in the HOA's financials, something that went beyond my pasture, and if they thought losing a dog park was their worst nightmare, they were about to find out just how deep the hole they'd dug truly went. I didn't sleep much after that meeting. Not from stress, no, that ship had sailed, but from focus. The kind that had kept me alive during fire seasons when the wind shifted and you had 10 seconds to decide which way to run. I was piecing something together, and I had the sense that if I tugged just a little harder, the whole thing might unravel. You see, in that stack of papers I'd pulled from the HOA website, there were more than just meeting minutes and dog park blueprints. One document had caught my attention near the bottom of a scanned PDF, a ledger entry labeled Community Expansion Assessment Phase 3, Parcel Reclassification $62,400. It was buried between landscaping invoices and pool maintenance budgets. No explanation, no breakdown, just a lump sum marked complete. That figure was too specific to be random, and too large to be for a fence, so the next morning I drove back into town, this time to the county recorder's office. I knew most of the clerks by name, but today I needed someone with deeper access. I asked for Calvin Rourke, head of land records, and a guy who didn't blink unless it made legal sense. I walked into his office with the parcel number and the date of the HOA vote written on a scrap of feed store receipt. Calvin took the paper, adjusted his tie always too tight, and began typing. After a few minutes, he gave a low whistle and turned his monitor toward me. "There's a filing here," he said, tapping the screen, signed 3 days after the board meeting. "They submitted a claim of adverse possession on that pasture." I leaned closer. "They actually filed that. Yeah, it was flagged for review. Our office didn't approve it. It's still pending." "But here's the kicker," he clicked another tab. "They also filed a lien on your land." I straightened. "What kind of lien?" "Special development lien. Claimed you owed the HOA for infrastructure improvements made to adjacent parcels. Said you benefited indirectly from HOA-funded upgrades." I stared at the screen and let that sink in. "They created fictional debt to justify seizing land." Calvin nodded grimly. "That's fraud, flat out. And if they used member dues to pay legal fees for that filing, that's misuse of funds." "You want the DA looped in?" "Absolutely." He printed everything and handed me the file. As I left the building, I made one more stop across the street to the district attorney's office. I asked to speak with Ada Marla Stevens. She and I had crossed paths 2 years back when a developer tried to forge an easement through a neighboring ranch. She remembered my name and took the file without hesitation. Her face darkened as she flipped through the documents. "They filed a lien on land they don't own, based on false infrastructure claims. That's not just civil, that's criminal intent to defraud." I nodded. "And they're collecting dues increases to fund it." She closed the file. "I'll open an investigation today. But I need one more thing, proof that HOA funds were used for this. Bank transfers, invoices, anything." That night I got it. A man named Barry Rowland showed up at my gate just after sundown, middle-aged, balding, and nervous as a squirrel in a kennel. He was the HOA treasurer until last month, when he quietly resigned for personal reasons. I'd never spoken to him before. "I can't stay long," he said, eyes darting like he expected Dolores to pop out of a bush. "But I saw what you said at the meeting. You're right. They used our reserve fund to pay the surveyor and the legal filings. I didn't find out until after I signed off." I didn't interrupt. He pulled a flash drive from his coat pocket. "The bank statements are on here. Transfers, account numbers, the works. I backed them up before I left." "I don't want to be part of this anymore." "You willing to speak to the DA?" He hesitated. "If I can do it off the record, maybe. I just want to keep my pension." I watched him fidget for a moment before nodding. "You did the right thing, Barry." He left without another word. By morning, I was back in Marla's office. She plugged in the flash drive and spent 20 minutes scrolling in silence. Then she looked up. "We've got enough for a full audit and probable cause for a search warrant. I'll have investigators at the HOA office by Friday." She wasn't bluffing. 2 days later, the sheriff's department rolled in with 2 unmarked sedans and a county vehicle. They entered the HOA's clubhouse just after noon. Residents stood outside watching as boxes of documents were carried out. Dolores wasn't there. She'd apparently taken a sudden vacation to Scottsdale. But her vice president, a smug guy named Todd with a perpetual golf tan, was on site. According to Ellis, he'd tried to argue until one of the deputies mentioned obstruction. Then he changed his tune. By the weekend, the county issued a freeze on all HOA financial activity pending investigation. Dues collection was suspended. Every planned project was halted. And the best part, a judge signed an order to have the fence dismantled at HOA expense, with the cost refunded from board member stipends. It didn't stop there. The county assessor reclassified the pasture's legal use back to agricultural designation, and the lien they'd filed vanished from the rolls like it had never existed. But the real twist came the following Monday. I received an envelope in the mail, no return address, just a county postmark. Inside was a letter unsigned that read, "Check parcel 49D. They did it twice. That parcel bordered my southern boundary. I hadn't looked that direction in months. The land was owned by a friend of mine, Anna Ridgway, who ran a small goat dairy. She probably hadn't noticed anything. But I drove out there that afternoon, and sure enough, the same aluminum fencing had been installed, this time with a different lock, and an HOA sign declaring it Temporary Community Garden Grand, opening soon. I called Anna. She was furious. "They told me it was an abandoned utility easement," she shouted. "They said they had permission." "They didn't," I said. "They're under investigation, and you need to file a claim now." She didn't waste time. By Thursday, Anna had joined the complaint. So did a third landowner, an elderly couple named the Weskers, whose back lot had been reclassified for stormwater runoff management by the HOA without notice. The Weskers had lived there since the 60s and never even joined the HOA. The DA's office confirmed a pattern. The HOA board had created a shadow map of undeveloped properties adjacent to Golden Trails, targeting parcels with unclear boundaries or absentee owners. They'd used falsified documentation, manipulated minutes, and forged approval votes to claim the land, reroute it through the HOA's name, and inflate the value of their development on paper. It was a land grab disguised as neighborhood improvement. By the end of the month, Dolores was formally charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit land theft, and misuse of community funds. Todd was charged with accessory fraud and obstruction. 3 other board members received subpoenas. Barry received immunity for his cooperation. The fence came down in pieces, hauled off by a work crew paid for by a court-appointed trustee, now managing the HOA's finances. Residents held a meeting to vote on dissolving the board entirely and replacing it with a volunteer committee. I didn't attend, but Anna told me they cheered when my name was mentioned. I never wanted to be a local hero. I just wanted to raise my cattle and be left alone. But sometimes, when the fire creeps close to your line, you don't wait for it to pass. You dig in, hold the hose, and make damn sure it doesn't burn what's yours. And this time, we didn't just stop the fire, we exposed the arsonists behind it. The morning the indictments went public, I was elbow deep in tractor grease, replacing the starter on my Massey Ferguson. The radio, crackling through the barn's tin roof, cut through the grind of metal with a news bulletin. Not local gossip. State-level coverage. Dolores Kensington, former president of the Golden Trails Estates Homeowners Association, has been charged with multiple felony counts, including conspiracy to commit land fraud and unlawful seizure of private property. I shut off the wrench and leaned back against a hay bale, grease on my sleeves and sweat clinging to my collar. It wasn't just the fence anymore. This was bigger. The kind of bigger that made state lawmakers start whispering about oversight reform. By the end of the week, the county grand jury had issued warrants for devices, emails, and internal memos. According to the assistant district attorney, the scheme stretched back nearly 6 years. It didn't just involve stolen land either. There were shell companies, phony LLCs used to cycle HOA funds into consultant fees and surveying services. Consultants who didn't exist, surveys that were never conducted, that $62,000 expansion assessment. Turns out, it was a front to hide kickbacks. Some of those payments funneled right into a private real estate trust under Dolores's name. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I was still waiting for one last thread to snap. That came when Anna called me at sunrise 3 days later. Her voice was tight. "They tried to access my lot again," she said. A man with a clipboard and a badge-looking thing claimed he was with the HOA's new interim committee, asked to inspect the easement compliance zone. I didn't answer right away. I was already pulling on my boots. I got to her property in 15 minutes. The man was still there, crouching near the west side of her barn with a metal detector. He wore khakis and a windbreaker, no ID visible. When I pulled up, he stood and tried to wave me off. "Private survey," he said. "Authorized by community development." "Which community?" I asked, stepping out of the truck. He hesitated. "Golden Trails Estates." "That HOA is under court-appointed receivership," I said, "and trespassing here's a felony now." "You want to explain who sent you?" He shifted, eyes scanning the tree line. "I was hired through a property management firm." "What firm?" He tensed but didn't answer. So I raised my voice just enough for the motion-activated camera I'd installed on Anna's pine tree to catch everything. "You're going to give me the name or I'm calling Deputy Ellis." That did it. He pulled a card from his pocket and dropped it on the ground like it burned. Then he backed off down the gravel path, mumbling about miscommunication. The card read, "Lakeside Property Holdings, LLC." I already knew the name. That was the same shell entity tied to a private development firm out of Houston 1 that had contributed heavily to a local councilman's campaign. The councilman, Alan Braddock, had been pushing for regional growth corridors since last spring. I handed the card off to Marla the next morning. By then, she had a team of auditors from the state attorney general's office assisting the investigation. The paper trail from Golden Trails to Lakeside Holdings wasn't even subtle. It was a straight wire transfer path, disguised as consulting fees for residential infrastructure scalability. The state stepped in within 48 hours, not just with legal muscle either. They froze the assets of the HOA and Lakeside Holdings. Bank accounts, properties, all of it, and that's when the real dominoes fell. Emails surfaced from Braddock's office emails where he discussed strategic annexing of unincorporated properties for green space conversion, a term that on paper looked like public benefit. In practice, it meant carving up rural land and flipping it to developers under the guise of beautification, the fence they built on my land. That was just the pilot program. They had plans drawn up to seize 7 more parcels. One was a veteran's homestead. Another was a community-run orchard. All of it was scheduled for reclassification in the next fiscal quarter. Braddock resigned before they could vote on his ethics committee removal. Dolores was denied bail, citing flight risk. Her lawyer argued she was being scapegoated, that she was merely following board policy. But the internal memos told a different story. She'd signed every authorization, approved every disbursement, and most damning, she'd sent an email to her vice president that read, "If we don't claim these parcels now, we'll lose them to private sale." Better to apologize later than ask permission. By the time her trial date was set, 5 other board members had flipped. They exchanged testimony for reduced charges. The state filed a civil suit to recover assets, including the unauthorized fence construction costs, fraudulent surveys, and illegally paid stipends. The community center where they held HOA meetings. It was seized and converted into a county-run public resource hub. Taxpayer-funded now. No dues. No politics. Anna and the Weskers filed civil claims and won. Their settlements were modest but symbolic. More importantly, the court restored their full property rights and issued a permanent injunction against any future development attempts without notarized consent. As for my pasture, I rebuilt the south fence with treated pine and added a solar-powered gate. Not fancy, but secure. I didn't need a monument, just peace of mind. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the cattle settled near the ridge, I stood by the old gate, the one they'd tried to lock me out of. I held the brass key in my hand. The same key they never thought to change. Ellis pulled up beside me, his cruiser kicking up a low trail of dust. "Judge handed down final sentence today," he said. "Kensington's getting 7 years. Braddock's under federal investigation now. Wire fraud across state lines." I nodded. "Good." He looked out at the open pasture. "You gonna join the new community board? They're forming a rural advisory panel." "Real positions, transparent." I shook my head. "I've got fencing to finish, and a tractor that won't start," he chuckled. "Well, if you ever change your mind." After he left, I walked the ridge alone. The wind ran clean through the grass, no aluminum walls breaking the line of sight. Horses grazed quietly near the old oak tree. The property was just as it should have been, undivided, unclaimed, and mine. No more fences, no more claims, just home. And that key, I didn't need it anymore, but I kept it on my belt anyway. A reminder that the quiet ones, the ones who stay out of the way, who mind their own land, are still watching. And when the time comes, they know exactly where the lines are drawn.